Chapter 4. Back to the Burrow. By 12 o'clock the next day, Harry's school trunk was packed with his school things and all the most prized possessions: the invisibility clock he had inherited from his father, the broomstick he had gotten from Cyrus, the enchanted map of Hogwarts he had been given by Fred and George Weasley last year. He had emptied his hiding place under the loose floorboard of all food, double-flaked every nook and cranny of his bedroom for forgotten spell book or quills, and taken down the chart on the wall counting down the days to September the 1st, on which he liked to cross off the days remaining until his return to Hogwarts. The atmosphere inside number 4 private drive was extremely tense. The imminent arrival at their house of an assorted of wizard was making the Dursleys uptight and irritable. Uncle Vernon had looked downright alarmed when Harry informed him that the Weasleys would be arriving at 5 o'clock the very next day. I hope you told them to dress up properly. These people, he sneered at once. I have seen the sort of stuff you lot wear. They had better have the decency to put up normal clothes, that's all. Harry felt a slight sense of foreboding. He had rarely seen Mr. and Mrs. Weasley wearing anything that the Dursleys would call normal. Their children might don muggle clothing during the holidays, but Mr. and Mrs. Weasley usually wore long robes in varying state of shabbiness. Harry wasn't bothered about what the neighbors would think, but he was anxious about how rude the Dursleys might be to the Weasleys if they turned up looking like their worst idea of wizards. Vernon had put on his best suit to some people. That might have looked like a gesture of welcome, but Harry knew it was because Uncle Vernon wanted to look impressive and intimidating. Dudley, on the other hand, looked somehow diminished. This was not because the diet was the last taking effect, but due to fright. Dudley had emerged from his last encounter with the full-grown wizard with the curly pigtail poking out of the seat of his trouser, and Aunt Putania and Uncle Vernon had had to pay for its removal at the private hospital in London. It wasn't altogether surprising, therefore, that Dudley kept running his hand nervously over his backside and walking sideways from the room to room, so as not to present his same target to the enemy. Lunch was an almost silent meal. Dudley didn't even protest at that food, cottage cheese and grated celery. Aunt Putania wasn't eating anything at all. Her arms were folded, her lips were pursed, and she seemed to be chewing her tongue, as though biting back the furious diatribe she longed to throw at Harry. Well, driving, of course. Vernon barked across the table, said Harry. He didn't thought of that. How were the Weasleys going to pick him up? They didn't have a car anymore. The old Ford Angelina they had once owned was currently running wild in the Forbidden Forest at Hogwarts. Mr. Weasley had borrowed a Ministry of Magic car last year. Possibly he will do the same today. I think so, said Harry. Uncle Vernon snorted into his moustache. Normally, Uncle Vernon would have asked that. What car Mr. Weasley drove? He tended to judge other men by how big and expensive their cars were, but Harry doubted whether Uncle Vernon would have taken to Mr. Weasley even if he drove a Ferrari. Harry spent most of the afternoon in his bedroom. He couldn't stand to watch Aunt Putania peer out through the net curtain every few seconds, as though there had been a warning about an escaped rhinoceros. Finally, at 4:45, Harry went back downstairs and into the living room. Aunt Tanya was completely striking caution. Uncle Vernon was pretending to read newspaper, but his tiny eyes were not moving, and Harry was sure he was really listening with all his might for the sound an approaching car. Dudley was crammed into an armchair. His porky hand beneath him clapped warmly around his bottom. Harry couldn't take the tension. He left the room and went and sat on the stair in the hall, his eyes on his watch and his heart pumping fast from excitement and nerves. But 5 o'clock came and then went. Uncle Vernon, pulsing slightly in his suit, opening the front door, peered up and down the street. Then withdrew his hat. Quick, they are late. He snarled at Harry. I know, said Harry. Maybe the traffic bad or something. Then past 5. And then a quarter past 5. Harry was starting to feel anxious himself now. At half past he heard Uncle Vernon and Aunt Putania conversing in terse mutters in the living room. No consideration at all. We might have had an engagement. Maybe they think they'll get invited to dinner if they are late. Well, they most certainly won't be, said Uncle Vernon, and Harry heard him stand up and start pacing the living room. They'll take the boy and go. There will be no hanging around. That's if they are coming at all. Probably mistaken the day. I dare say their kind don't set much store by punctuality. Either that or they drive some tin pot car that's broken. Oh, Harry jumped up. From the other side of the living room door came the sound of the three Dursleys scrambling, panic stricken, across the room. Next moment, Dudley came flying into the hall, looking terrified. What happened? Said Harry. What's the matter? But Dudley didn't seem to be able to speak. Hands still clapped over his buttock. He waded as fast as he could into the kitchen. Harry hurried into the living room. Loud banging and scraping were coming from behind the Dursleys' board-up replace, which had fake coal replugged in front of it. What is it? Gasped Aunt Putania, who had backed into the wall and was starting terrified toward the. Uh, what is it, Warner? But we were left in doubt. Barely a second longer voice could be heard from inside the block replace. Ouch! Fred, no, go back. Right. There has been some kind of mistake. Tell George not to ouch. George, no, there is no room. Go back quickly and tell Ron. Maybe Harry can hear us. Dad, maybe he'll be able to let us out. There was a loud hammering of the door behind the electric. Harry, Harry, can you hear us? Dursleys rounded on Harry like a pair of angry Wolverine. What is this? Growled Uncle Vernon. Going on? They tried to get here by flu powder, said Harry, getting a mad desire to laugh. They can travel by fire. Only you have blocked the replace. Hang on. Approached the replace and called through the port. Mr. Weasley, can you hear me? The hammering stopped. Somebody inside the chimney, he said, Shh. Mr. Weasley, it's Harry. The replace has been blocked up. You won't be able to get through there. Damn, said Mr. Weasley. Voice. What on earth if they won't block up the replace? They have got an electric. Harry explained. Really? Said Mr. Weasley's voice excitedly. Electric, you say? Plug? Gracious. I must see that. Stink. Ouch. Ron's voice now joined the others. What are we doing here? Has something gone wrong? Oh no, Ron emphasized twice, very specifically. No, this is exactly where we wanted to end up. Yet, we are having the time to for our lives here, said George, whose voice sounded muffled, as though he was squashed against the wall. Boys, boys, said Mr. Weasley vaguely. I'm trying to think what to do. Yes, only way. Stand back, Harry. Harry retreated to the sofa. Uncle Vernon, however, moved forward. Wait a moment, he bellowed at the word. What exactly are you going to? Bang! The electric shot across the room as the board up replaced burst outward, expelling Mr. Weasley, Fred, George, and Ron in a cloud of rubble and loose chimping, and Putania shrieked and fell backward over the coffee table. Uncle Vernon caught her before she hit the floor and gaped, speechless, at the Wesleys, all of whom had bright red hair, including Fred and George, who were identical to the last Fred. That's better, panted Mr. Weasley, brushing dust from his long green robes and straightened his glasses. You must be Harry's aunt and uncle, tall, thin, and balding. He moved toward Uncle Vernon, his hand outstretched, but Uncle Vernon backed away several paces, dragging Aunt Tanya word utterly failed Uncle Vernon. His best suit was covered in white dust, which had settled in his hair and mustache, and made him look as though he had just had 30 years. Yes, sorry about that, said Mr. Weasley, lowering his hand and looking over his shoulder at the bastard place. It's all my fault. It just didn't occur to me that we wouldn't be able to get out at the other end. I had your replace connected to the flu network. You see, just for an afternoon, you know. So we have got to get Harry. Muggle replays aren't supposed to be connected, strictly speakingly, but I have got a useful contact at the flu regulation panel and he fixed it for me. I can put it right in a jiffy. So don't worry, I'll write letters to send the boy back and then I can repair your replace before I disappear. Harry was ready to bet that the Dursleys hadn't understood a single word of this. They were still gaping at Mr. Weasley, thunderstruck. Aunt Britannia staggered upright again and hid behind Uncle Vernon. Hello, Harry, said Mr. Weasley brightly. Got your trunk ready? Upstairs, said Harry, grinning back. You get it, said Fred at once, winking at Harry. He and George left the room. They knew where Harry's bedroom was, having once resumed him from it in the dead of night. Harry suspected that Fred and George were hoping for a glimpse of Dudley. They had heard a lot about him from Harry. Well, said Mr. Weasley, swinging his arm slightly, while he tried to and worked to break the very nasty silence. Very nice place you have got here. As the usually spotless living room was now covered with dust and bit of bricks. This remark didn't go down too well with the Dursleys. Uncle Vernon's face purpled once more, and Aunt Britannia started chewing her tongue again. However, they seemed too scared to actually say anything. Mr. Weasley was looking around. He loved everything to do with muggles. Harry could see him reaching to go and examine the television and the video recorder. They run off electricity, do they? He said knowledgeably. Yes, I can see the plug. I collect plugs, he added to Uncle Vernon. And batteries. Got a very large collection of batteries. My wife thinks I'm mad, but there you are, Uncle Vernon cleared throat. Mr. Weasley was mad too. He moved ever so slightly to the right, screening Aunt Britannia from view, as though he thought Mr. Weasley might suddenly run at them and attack. Dudley suddenly reappeared in the room. Harry could hear the clunk of his trunk on the stairs and knew that the sound had scared Dudley out of the kitchen. Dudley edged along the wall, gazing at Mr. Weasley with terrified eyes, and attempted to counsel himself behind his mother and father. Unfortunately, Uncle Vernon's bulk, while sufficient to ride Bonnie and Putania, was however near enough to conceal Dudley. This is your cousin, isn't it, Harry? Said Mr. Weasley, taking another brave stab at making conversation. Yep, said Harry. That's Dudley. He and Ron exchanged glances and then quietly looked away from each other. The temptation to burst out laughing was almost overwhelming. Dudley was still clenching his bottom as though afraid it might fall off. Mr. Weasley, however, seemed genuinely concerned at Dudley's peculiar behavior. Indeed, from the tone of his voice when the next spoke, Harry was quite sure that Mr. Weasley thought Dudley was quite as mad as Dursley's, but he was expect that Mr. Weasley felt sympathy rather than fear. Having a good holiday, Dudley, he said kindly. Dudley whimpered. Harry saw his hand tighten still harder over his massive backside. Fred and George came back into the room carrying Harry's school trunk. They glanced round as they entered and spotted Dudley, their faces cranked into identical evil grins. All right, said Mr. Weasley. Better get cracking then. He pushed up and sleeves of his robe and took out his wand. Harry saw the Dursley draw back against the wall as once. Incendio, said Mr. Weasley, pointing his wand at the hole in the wall behind him. Flames rose at once in the place, cracking merrily as though they had been burning for hours. Mr. Weasley took a small drawstring bag from his pocket, untied it, took a pinch of the powder inside and threw it onto the flame, which turned emerald green and roared higher than ever. Off you go then, Fred, said Mr. Weasley. Coming, said Fred. Oh no, hang on. A bag of sweet had spilled out of Fred's pocket and the content were now rolling in every direction. Big fat toffee in brightly colored wrap. Fred scampered around the cramming them back into his pocket and gave the Dursley a cheery wave, stepped forward and walked right into the replace, saying the Burrow. And Putania gave a little startling gasp. There was a waltzing sound and fresh vanish. Right then, George, said Mr. Weasley, you and the trunk. Harry helped George carry the trunk forward into the flame and turn it onto its end so that he could hold it better. Then with a second whoosh, George had cried the Burrow and vanished too. Ron, you next, said Mr. Weasley. See you, said Ron brightly to Dursley's. He grinned broadly at Harry, then stepped into the replace, shouted the Burrow, and disappeared. Now, Harry and Mr. Weasley alone remained. Well, by then, said Harry to Dursley's. They didn't say anything at all. Harry moved toward the fire, but just as he reached the edge of the hearth, Mr. Weasley put out a hand and held him back. He was looking at the Dursleys in amazement. Harry said goodbye to you, he said. Didn't you hear him? It doesn't matter, Harry muttered to Mr. Weasley. Honestly, I don't care. Mr. Weasley did not remove his hand from Harry's shoulder. You aren't going to see your nephew till next summer, he said to Uncle Vernon in mild indignation. Surely you are going to say goodbye. Uncle Vernon's face worked furiously. The idea of being taught consideration by a man who had just blasted away half his live room wall seemed to be causing him intense suffering, but Mr. Weasley's hand was still in his hand and Uncle Vernon's tiny eye darted to it once before he said very resentfully, "Goodbye then, see you," said Harry, putting one foot forward into the green flames, which felt pleasantly like warm breath. At that moment, however, a horrible ganging sound erupted behind him, and Aunt Putania started to scream. Harry whirled around. Dudley was no longer standing behind his parents. He was kneeling beside the coffee table and he was gagging and sputtering on a foot-long purple slimy thing that was protruding from his mouth. One bewildered second later, Harry realized that the foot-long thing was Dudley's tongue, and that a bright-colored toffee wrapped lay on the floor before him. Aunt Britannia hurled herself onto the ground beside her. Dudley, seized the end of his swallowed tongue and attempted to wrench it out of his mouth. Unsurprisingly, Dudley yelled and sputtered worse than ever, trying to get it off. The Vernon was billowing and waving his arm around to Mr. Weasley. He had to shout to make himself heard. "Don't worry, I can sort him out," he yelled, advancing on Dudley with his hand outstretched. But Aunt Putania screamed worse than ever and threw herself on the top of Dudley, shielding him from Mr. Weasley. "No, really," said Mr. Weasley desperately. "It's a simple process." "It was the toffee," my son said, real practically joker. "It's only an engrandment charm. At least I think it is. Place I can correct it." But far from being reassured, the Dursleys became more panic-stricken, and Putania was sobbing hysterically, tugging Dudley's tongue as though determined to trip it out. Dudley appeared to be suffocating under the combined pressure of his mother and his tongue, and Uncle Vernon, who had lost control completely, seized a china gear from on top of the side door and threw it very hard on Mr. Weasley, who ducked, causing the ornament to shatter in the blaster replace. "Now really," said Mr. Weasley angrily, brandishing his wand, "I am trying to help bellowing like a wounded hippo." Uncle Vernon snatched up another ornament. "Harry, go, just go," Mr. Weasley shouted his wand on Uncle Vernon. "I'll sort this out." Harry didn't want to miss the fun, but Uncle Vernon's second ornament narrowly missed the left ear, and on balance, he thought it best to leave the situation to Mr. Weasley. He stepped into the place, looking over his shoulder as he said the Burrow. His last fleeting glimpse of the living room was of Mr. Weasley's blasting a third ornament out of Uncle Vernon's hand with his wand, and Putania screaming the lying on top of Dudley, and Dudley's tongue rolling around like a great slimy python. But next moment Harry had begun to spin very fast, and the Dursleys' living room was whisked out of a slide in a rush of emerald green flame. That's it for today. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for next chapter. Till then, see ya. Bye bye.